Okay. Watch.
Welcome everyone. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the City of Bangor Tree Board. July 9th. Greg Edwards, I'm the chair. Go around and introduce each other.
Sure. I'm Dominic Rizzo, I'm committee member and resident of Bangor.
Karen Mary's daughter, I'm a committee member.
Benjamin Aruda, City of Bangor Forestry Manager.
Sophia Cameron, I am the forestry intern with the city of Bangor.
Steve Smith, Assistant City Director, Public Works Director.
Annette Dodd.
There's lots to talk about, so we'll start with approval of the meeting minutes. I would accept a motion to approve. So moved. All in favor? So we can press second. We'll say unanimously approved. Forestry division by the numbers, which you will have on.
On the backside.
Yeah.
Have another one of those? Not one. Is that the one that I?
Nope. I've got. Okay, so second quarter of 2025 was very busy for forestry division. A lot of things happened in the spring. At that time, after we closed our previous meeting in April, I was getting ready for spring planting. That is also the time during the spring draft for union members at Public Works, at which time you can change division membership. So we made some changes in division membership. We lost an employee and then gained another employee. And then unfortunately, there was just some attendance issues with that replacement employee. We also lost the licensed arborist, as we spoke about in April, that fully got their licensure, pesticide certificates, things of that nature. And springtime is also a very busy season for forestry division. As you all may know, we take care of all the downtown plantings. So we install 25 self-watering planters and then 25 watering boxes or planter boxes downtown, and then do over 60, I believe, bridge boxes, the little flower window boxes. So that took us out of our usual schedule due to lack of staffing. And we also deliver and put out some of the mulch for the big dig. So April was very busy for us. So we did miss the window for planting, and then due to budgets and budget issues within the division and late postings from finance department, I found out I was actually over budget on a lot of items, so I could not purchase stock. But this is a new year, so looking at doing fall planting. Sophie, I tasked her with doing the inspections of all of our previous planted stock that we had done both spring and fall of 2024. And what we saw was a pretty good indication that spring of last year, we ran into that drought. We did some watering. I was able to pull Marcia off downtown watering and water some of the trees that we had recently installed, but we had a pretty high number of mortality of recently spring planted just due to that drought directly after in the springtime. So what we focused on was service requests completion and getting things done for paving division. forestry division is responsible for making sure that trees are cleared above the roads. And sidewalks to an appropriate height before they get paved and prepped for paving. So we did that list. We were able to get 37 C-Click Fix requests closed in the second quarter. That's small things and big things included. We did preventative pruning, which is inclusive of paving, fruit and brown tail moth pruning. Principal trees, we were able to prune 113 trees during that time. We were also able to engage with a new tree service contractor who was able to remove some of the trees that had been stagnating on a previous list. Some dated back to 2022. 6 trees were removed by the contractor. 8 were removed by the forestry division employees. Some of the other tasks we did were cleanup work in the city forest and a couple of large projects for the golf course in that time. One of the things you may all see going around that unfortunately we have some say in, but also it comes down to what their determination is Versant Power. And in some of their removals, some residents are upset and I can certainly see that. Some of the streets that they choose to do a couple removals on don't have very many trees left. But these are all scenarios where they do meet the removal guidelines. They're large Norway maple trees that are split, rotten, and now shaped like a menorah around high voltage power lines. So Versant deemed that they needed to come down. Unfortunately, the communication was not great with Versant Power, so they were removed without my knowledge. So I had upset residents contact me wondering why these trees were removed. But I've since spoken with the line foreman for this section and they will be communicating better when they can, but they are moving fast and going through all the different grids within Bangor currently, so.
Question.
Yeah.
If they remove a tree, is it their obligation to replace a tree maybe more fitting in that location or in that area?
I believe it falls within us because it's our city property, but they maintain the right of ways.
Right.
And I would assume the cost of removal would outweigh the cost of replanting. And to be honest, I know at least one of these, it can't get replanted. The Esplanade is too small. There's been a sidewalk that's been added. I want to say it's on the upper end of Grove Street, almost near the end, so the north end, so. Arbor Day 2025, we were able to plant Higgin cherry at 14th Street School. That was very well received. The students asked great questions. We had a little over 30 kindergarten students. Everybody was studying trees during that time. There was some good reception there for the students and the trees doing good and it's in the ground. It's a separate item, but I can quickly update Finson Road Nursery. That's progressing very nicely. I just got back from vacation and found out the fencing contractor is putting in the fence. So the poles are all in, the tension lines are all in. Public Works Forestry Division has cleared the electrical right of way for the electricity into the site. A pole contractor has drilled and set electrical poles. And the next step, I think, within the next week or two is to have the service drop put in from the street to Finson Nursery.
Is this gonna include greenhouse space or it's all open air?
Currently, it's all open air, and then as we progress, I would love to put in the greenhouse space to start smaller stock and go from there. And the biggest thing, we have a well that has been drilled. It's 270 feet and it produces a lot of water. The water is coming out of the cover. That's how much water we have there, so that's good. Spring planting, I did mention that first off. No spring planting done on Esplanades or on public property. We did plant 14 trees during that project at the golf course as a screen, so, and those were all donated trees that UMaine gave to us, so. Resident tree removal requests, we have no outstanding requests at this time. So. And there again, spring projects 2025, it's just broken out there, so.
It's a busy quarter.
Yeah.
We'll try to make up for those trees in the fall.
Mhm.
Awesome. Let's see, urban forestry management plan, sounds like all those submissions have come in and.
Yes,
Was one selected?
we have narrowed down and chosen one. We do have a list. If you all would like to look at the pros and cons of each. And I can also share with you. If you don't already know that it's readily available on the city website, the other submissions. I did give them a hard notification of roughly the second week of July. So if you would like to discuss it further, we can do another session.
Can you just say who
Yeah,
who-
Eocene Environmental Group, they're out of Des Moines, Iowa. So they were chosen. We had a very, very productive follow-up meeting with them. They answered questions very well. Despite being in Iowa, they will be having quite a few in-person meetings. And then are very open to virtual meetings as well. So.
They were also very well within the budget.
Yes.
So if we want to, we have that chunk of money set aside for specifically this, so that means that we can kind of ask for more. We think we need more from them.
We were awarded 75,000 through that IRA grant. Eocene came in at 53,960. We have been in touch with the Forest Service. And those funds, excess funds are not strictly earmarked for management plan. So we're working through the finer details to see whether those funds could be allocated to different resources, management. And then based on their recommendations, possibly, purchasing planting stock for the new nursery, so.
Well, my recollection is that you had things that were bottom line you wanted them to do, but you
Yes.
had some additional things that,
Mhm.
depending on the budget, you might ask them to do. So were they, how many of those things fit into that budget?
I think they pretty much covered everything.
Mhm.
Let me look at our notes here. So I think they pretty much hit on everything, but
Mhm.
as they were more open to as we progress in the meetings, adding things in. For instance, in their bid, they didn't mention climate change. But that's something we would like to see be included, and they were very receptive to, yeah, we can add in a section on climate change and. And out of all of them, I think these and one other bidder were open to myself having, input on how the plan is, and then being very receptive and respectful of tree board members' input and members of the public, so. And it's all mostly on the ground prescription versus some of the other companies would use some remote sensing, LiDAR drones. Aerial imagery to write a plan and have staff outside of the. The
Core group.
core group writing the plan, just have a writing team write the plan, so it was very far removed for some of those. It's more focused and tailored.
And the timeline for them to begin?
Timeline for them to begin, I believe it was,
As soon as it goes through the finance
Yeah.
committee, which I think is the 21st.
Yeah.
I believe.
Says here.
So once that goes through approval, they said that we would have our kickoff meeting.
Mhm.
I mean, we didn't let them know officially yet, but
yeah. And then they were also pretty short on a timeline, I think it was what, a year?
15 months
15
or
months.
something, yeah.
Got the plan done, so.
Sounds good.
Mhm. And that plan also included an operational plan to guide myself and the department or division, as well as a management plan to look at the big pictures, so.
Do you know how much in terms of public feedback, what they designed for that? Did they plan on like a public meeting? Or,
Yes,
like,
yep, I believe they have either. Two public meetings, so one initial kickoff, and then I believe a follow-up meeting as they are writing. The plan.
And I don't think you need us to approve it, because you're, you get all the,
Yeah.
and you were the expert on this,
Yep.
so.
Oh, yeah, no, and it's all publicly available, all the bid tabs, they are on finance website, but I can also forward you the bid tabs individually or as a
Yeah,
whole.
if you wanted to send the pro con sheet, that would be
Yeah.
nice, it would give us an understanding of.
Yep.
What was in the different proposals.
Yeah.
Would you like us to give a thumbs up so that at least, when you go to finance committee, you're like.
Oh, yeah, I mean, don't feel pressured as to say yay or nay now,
I'll
because
check with the
I've given
board.
you very little information.
I trust.
I trust the process.
They're very well respected. Yeah,
Mhm.
they've
Yeah.
done a lot of plans for
Yeah.
similarly sized
Mhm.
cities. I think he's the director, but Dr. Howard is a very well respected Midwestern University professor, along with being involved in this project, and I checked in on a lot of his research that he has done specifically for urban forestry, and it seems very sound and well guided, so.
Good, okay. That brings us to Sophia.
Yeah. All of you were here for my last presentation. No one is new, correct? Okay. I shared it with you, so that should hopefully work.
Smells like fall.
Gotta love AI.
What about the email that you had open?
Yes.
Keep sending receipt. I was going to do like a 45-minute long thing, but since you have all heard kind of the broad strokes of this before, I might skip through a little bit in order to, save us all a little bit of time. So this is mostly going to be kind of a presentation of what the final draft. This is a living document, so it's going to be edited as time goes on. I would really encourage you all to kind of review it at your leisure, because there's a lot in here. However, I'm not going to explain to you guys what EAB is again, because I'm sure everyone is familiar at this point. I'm probably not going to spend a ton of time going back over the inventory, but we are gonna talk kind of about what the final recommendations of all of this is, just so you were all aware, and we would like to kind of extend the time of this so that y'all can offer, questions, insight, things that you would like to see included, things that you think would improve it, things that you think could be admitted. Just so that way, when we take it to the infrastructure committee for final approval, it has kind of all of your guys' stamp of approval. And again, like Ben said, with the urban forest management plan situation, if that requires that we meet again after you've read through this whole thing, let us know and we can do that as long as it's before the 21st. All right, so this obviously was my master's project and Ben was a major help in it. Aaron was a major help in it before he left. And then I also had a lot of advisement from Dr. Jessica Leahy, who does a lot of work with kind of citizen-facing forestry stuff and how you go through the sociology of having an urban forest. She also kind of wrote the main book on how to have a wood bank, which was super helpful as part of this. Dr. Adam Degno, who is the director of the School of Forest Resources at the University of Maine Orem now, but has been their economics professor for many years. And then Dr. William Livingston, who is the in-house expert on pests, tree pests. So this is the screenshot of the updated quarantine map for Emerald Ash Borer from the Maine Forest Service. You can see that the new additions in 2025, a lot of them are in areas where there was already populations of Emerald Ash Borer, known populations, but we do have these satellite jumps, one specifically here in Belfast and one on Mount Desert Island. Both of those, I believe, were found this spring. And you can also see that this is Herman, and from, what would that town be?
I don't know.
But it has jumped into Stetson as well. So it has crossed the town line there. We still have no confirmed cases in Bangor as of yet. We've been doing this past spring since, we've had a lot of movement on the project. We have been speaking to the media a lot, which I think has generated a lot of attention, and we've had really good feedback from that, for the most part. And people specifically in town have seemed very, very engaged, which has been great because the more eyes we have on this, the better. One of the questions that I got a lot through this whole process was, why are we worrying now? I think there's often this thought process that you need to wait until you see Emerald Ash Borer within an area to start acting. This is from a study from Smitley et al. In 2008, where they essentially were looking at how long it would take for Emerald Ash Borer to travel from an epicenter that they identified. So over the course of the year, you could see 40% thinning of the canopy, which was their metric, which essentially is the point at which you start to notice a tree is in active decline when they have lost 40% of their canopy. They found that within a year, it was 12 miles from the epicenter, and within 3 years, it was 32 miles from the epicenter. So that's about a 10-mile increase per year of infestation. And some of that is short-range dispersal because they can fly up to a couple miles from the tree that they're on if need be. But they only really do that if they've run out of food on that tree. So that typically is after many, many years of infestation. This dispersal is more from human interactions. So that's where we have the wood quarantines and trying to keep things more contained. But just that being said, we do know it is in Herman. I don't know where specifically in Herman. But from the center of Herman to downtown Bangor is less than 7 miles, and it has been there since 2023, correct? So at this point, while we haven't identified it in Bangor, because it is slow to progress until all at once you have a bunch of dead trees, it is pretty safe to assume that it is somewhere in the city, especially given that we've had now 2 summers since it was identified there, and we have this I-95 corridor here where there's tons of recreation and tons of people bringing firewood. Did you have a question?
Are you gonna address or describe the wood quarantine thing?
Oh, yes, yeah, I can go. How do I go back a slide? So the wood quarantine specifically, this map is a good version of it. The active quarantine zone is these hash marks here. The idea of that is that no wood should move out of these areas into any of the non-hash marked areas. That being said, that doesn't mean the wood can't come from areas that aren't in the quarantine zone into this, because the idea is this is where the insect may be, and this is where we definitely know the insect at this point is not. And so obviously, when you have this big jump, what you're seeing here is someone from either further New England or elsewhere brought some sort of wood product, or from southern Maine, and then went to Belfast, which is a high recreation, high tourism area, or went to Mount Desert Island, which is a high recreation, high tourism area. So
I'm wondering how it works because we got firewood delivered from a new person this spring and he'd never heard of the emerald ash borer.
where, do you know what town it came from?
It was right in this local area. I asked him that because I said, there's, you know, they don't want it's traveling any distance, but he had literally never heard of emerald ash borer. I was very concerned.
Yeah, so there are best management practices in place within these quarantine zones, which we are happy to share that resource with you all via email, should you want it. And I think when we finally post this final project after it's been approved to the website, that will be accompanied by several Maine Forest Service resources as well. Just because I think those are incredibly useful, especially when it comes to quarantine. But there are rules around, like if you harvest it in October because the insect is dormant through the winter, if you harvest it in the late fall and move it and then use it before the spring when there's emergence, then that's fine. And there's debarking processes, and if you can grind it, then use it for biomass, then that's okay. Just anything that's ensuring that the insect either is killed inside of the wood or it doesn't move out of the area, then that is all okay. The idea is like, we don't want to have a firewood log sitting outside your house that then suddenly explodes with adults in the winter. But I mean, if it came from Penobscot County, if you look at this, as long as it didn't come from one of these two towns.
It was from Penobscot County.
Yeah. And most of Penobscot County is not yet in quarantine, so that raises your chances a little bit, makes it less likely. Any other questions on this? So risk posed by emerald ash borer, I believe I talked about this at the last meeting as well. Through this research process, I found that there is actually a study on how brittle this wood becomes, and it's about 10% more brittle than like normal dead wood. A lot of that is because of the galleries, and it really screws up the structural integrity. And then additionally, the top of that tree gets really dry really fast. So what you have is situations like this where you can see this is the dirt road, this is a rural area. We're not in a rural area in downtown Bangor where we have a lot of our really big ash trees. So just by chance, without anything happening, you'll have a tree that falls on a car, or falls on a person, or a branch that falls on the road, and then Ben gets called back from vacation early because you have emergency situations. So all that being said, knowing that it's in Herman and knowing the risk that it poses to public safety, public health, and damage to private property, acting now is not unreasonable. We reviewed this pretty heavily in my last presentation as well. We did complete the urban and street tree inventory, which we're calling the CUSTI. Just for abbreviation's sake, we walked literally every street in the city, which was enlightening and awesome. And we got point by point data of every publicly owned tree. Again, that doesn't include any privately owned trees, and it doesn't include any trees in the forested areas. However, this summer, that was what me and Ben were doing all day. We are going through the process of doing a more traditional forest inventory of Prentice, Brown, Essex, and I think we're using the inventory data from Dave Irving, who was our consulting forester for this Roland Perry City Forest. So we're going to have that data, and that will give pretty good estimates on the percentages of ash that we have. Additionally, with that, we are walking the trails in all of those places and making note of any ash trees that are kind of within falling distance of those trails. that are over 8 inches. So things that would become hazardous pretty quickly, and that way Parks and Rec are aware of them moving forward. And with that, we had sort of tree by tree data on whether or not they were over a house, whether or not they were over utility lines, over sidewalks, over roadways, things like that. And it also meant that we could identify trees that were good candidates for treatment just based on how full their canopy was, whether or not they had structural defects. And I'm saying that because it's important moving forward when we talk about how we made these decisions. Total number of active urban trees is 8,574. And the total number of active urban ash is 1,854, so that's about 20% of the urban canopy, which is a very large portion. Especially when you notice that the other 22% is Norway maples, which, as Ben just said, we have had a lot of trouble with. Many of those are over mature, many of those were planted incorrectly in the incorrect place. Many of them, Norway maples are prone to things like ice damage and wind throw, and they just don't hold up when they get older. Additionally, they're an invasive plant species in the state. So we were in Essex Woods today, and there's this one section that I call the Norway Maple Forest, because all of the Norway maple saplings have outcompeted all of the red maples or other hardwoods. So having a high percentage of them is okay for now, but the recommendation is that we step away from that, obviously. They're also prone to another invasive beetle species that is not found in Maine yet, but was in Massachusetts several years ago. That's a little bit more manageable because it's easier to notice it sooner, but just something to keep in mind that we already know that there's an invasive insect species that does favor Norway maples in the New England region. And then if you notice, everything else is below 10% of the population. So this is a very non-biodiverse urban canopy that we have here. And if you were to slash that 20% of it, what are we left with? And it's invasive tree species and not much else. So all that being said, that sounds very grim. It is awesome that we have this data because it means that we can make some really tailored decisions for this specific problem, which was great planning on Ben and Aaron's part. So our recommended management strategies, again, this also isn't new to you all. Treating them, and when I say treating, I mean chemical treatment, injecting them with a product called emamectin benzoate that has been found to be incredibly effective in preventing emerald ash, preventing and treating emerald ash borer. If you inject it into an already infested tree, it will kill the infestation and the tree can recover. You just have to catch it early enough. Additionally, we identified through that inventory trees that were already considered somewhat hazardous and would become more hazardous in the future. Trees that weren't necessarily planted in the right place, trees that were looming over people's houses or growing up through power lines. And we identified those as trees that can't be treated and then so should be planned for removal ahead of this infestation or as soon as we detect emerald ash borer in the area, getting started on that so that when those trees become infested, they aren't posing these major hazards. And I'll show you some examples of that in a moment. Additionally, replacement. So we want to replace any removed ash trees with new trees to maintain future canopy coverage, with an emphasis on increasing that species diversity, as well as taking things like climate change into consideration and making sure things are planted in the right place. We also want to increase future canopy by planting more trees than are removed every year, which is ambitious, but doable, especially with the nursery situation. And then, like I said, improving species diversity and climate resilience. Continuing to monitor is a really big deal. One of the tenets of integrated pest management is to continue to look after the things that you're treating with insecticide to make sure that they're responding well and it's working. And then additionally, continuing with that really strong public education and outreach component of this that we've already been sort of working on as we've gone through this process. So our treatment strategy, like I said, we are using an emamectin benzoate product. Ben was recently licensed as a pesticide applicator and you're working on your master's license now. So for this year, we did contract with a license or a master pesticide applicator, Rummelman, who lives in the area. And he was there to supervise as he and Ben did injections this year. Hopefully by next year, Ben will be fully licensed, and then we won't need to assume that extra cost of a contracted pesticide applicator. Essentially what this process is you drill a hole into the base of the trunk here, and then you use, it's a pneumatic injector, so it's calibrated to inject the specific amount that you want to use. And it gets injected into the tree through these little things called arbor plugs, which kind of targets it into that, vascular tissue that the insect feeds on, and then it's translocated within the tree through that vascular tissue, so that if there are larvae feeding in the trunk, they eat that tissue and they die. Additionally, it does, if applied at the correct rate, reach the canopy, and the adults are leaf eaters. And so then it's kind of a two-pronged attack system where you have the larvae inside the tree dying from what they're eating, and the adults outside the tree dying from what they're eating. And it, like I said, it can work as either a preventative treatment or a retroactive treatment if you do identify emerald ash borer. The thing that we're doing with this, because this lasts for 3 years, once you inject it once, is we are starting from the west side of Bangor, which is closest to Herman, where we know there's an active infestation. And I'll talk a little bit more about this at the end, but we have injected these 85 trees in green this year, so that those trees are now good to go for the next 3 years. So should anything have already jumped over or jump over within the next little while, they'll be protected. And then the following year, next year, in the spring, we will do the ones in yellow, and then the next year we'll do the ones in orange. And this is a cost saving method. If we treated all of these at once, it would be a very large lump sum every 3 years, and this way we're spreading out the cost across a greater time period. And we intend to do that because the killing front of the insect is typically 7 to 10 years long. And when I say killing front, I mean like the insect passes ahead and eats all of the food, and there's nothing left for any insects behind it. So the idea is they can't necessarily jump back. So we intend to continue this and continue to do this for 3 cycles. So that would be a total of 9 years, and then reassess at the end of that 9-year period to determine if it's safe to stop treating or if we should add on another cycle, just to make sure that it doesn't stay in the area. Required removal strategy, like I said, these are those images that of trees that are not eligible for treatment at this time. The major things that I want to point out here is, this is pretty obvious. This is like leaning towards a children's playground. On the other side of this tree, which I didn't get a good picture of it, this whole side is ripped out from a branch that fell off. It's never going to grow straight. It has this weak point in the middle of it. You can't really see it, but from the zero turn mower from the folks that mow the parks, there's some damage at the base. You can see it a little bit better here. This tree is leaning towards this uninsulated top power line, which could be a major fire hazard if dead branches start falling on it. You see there are exposed roots here that are getting hit by a lawnmower. There's damage at the base. There's some very light blonding here that could indicate some sort of health issue. And then you'll also notice that it is the term lion's tailed. What is so it doesn't have any lower branches. It's all weighted to one side and kind of just has this one little puff ball at the top. Additionally, this tree is, I think this one was 18 inches in diameter, which if that falls on a car is a pretty big deal. So the way we identified these trees was, again, we had all of that information from the inventory, and we put it through this crazy looking flow chart that I won't spend a ton of time on, but essentially that allowed us to assess the risk that each tree posed, specifically ash trees. And so you would have, this is group 1 up here, and those are trees that should be removed as soon as possible, as soon as we identify emerald ash borer in the area. Removal group 2 could wait a year or 2, removal group 3 could wait a couple more years, and 4 a couple more. And this is spread out across, because of each of these groups, across a 4-year period, anticipated depending on kind of staffing decisions moving forward. Replacement strategy, I've shown you all this figure before. We get a lot of ecosystem services from our urban trees that people don't necessarily think to evaluate. And I thought through this project, it would be incredibly important to add value to them. So I'll show you that in a moment. But this is things like dealing with an urban heat island effect, which occurs because you have these tall buildings that are trapping heat below it. Additionally, we have tons of paved surfaces in the city, which attract and retain heat. So trees can sort of mitigate that. You get reduced rates of heart disease, reduced obesity levels, reduced stress levels that lead to fewer cardiac situations, because you have more people recreating, because it's nicer to be outside when there are more trees. Filters air pollution, increases property values, they manage stormwater in a big way, and then additionally, just all the other sort of ecosystem, wildlife, habitat scenarios that you have from urban trees. Another thing that was not on this that I found really interesting, because I'm from the city of Philadelphia, and there was a study out of the city of Philadelphia where they found that the more trees you have in and along streets, the fewer car accidents and the less crime overall. And that was pretty strongly supported by their research. So there's a lot of things that we get from this that are important. And so when we're moving through this process, while we do have to remove trees, we need to make sure that we are also adding in more, just so we can meet that goal of increasing our urban canopy. Additionally, though, we want to make sure that we're planting the right tree in the right place, and so that we don't get things that look like this. And Ben has been really good about putting together a list for citizens that want tree replacements that make sure that they're appropriately sized. So hopefully in the future, we won't have Versant doing this to trees. So in order to evaluate all of these things, I did a cost benefit analysis. This also included going through the process of figuring out estimated costs of treatment and estimated costs of removals. So this is going to be a bunch of numbers. It will be summarized at the end, so bear with me. So we selected those 250 treatment trees, and again, we treated 85 of those this year. The discounted benefit that those trees provide based on a study by Kovacs et al. That essentially assigned values to trees based on X, Y, or Z. The total for all of those trees was $461,000, and this is over that 9-year treatment cycle that I mentioned. That's discounted by 5% over that time period, because money spent today is worth more than money spent later. So it just gives a better estimate of what that cost would be. So per tree, the benefit that is provided is $1,846. The discounted cost of treating those trees using the product that we used, and this is even a little bit inflated because we found some new research after I made this presentation that lowered that injection rate. So that was $26,864. And across that 9-year treatment cycle, or $107 per tree. The cost of removing them, and this was assumed to just be with in-house labor and not using a contractor, which would not necessarily be the case. So again, this number is probably lower than it would be realistically, was $158,000, or $634 per tree. So you can obviously see already this cost far outweighs this cost. And then additionally, it was $384 per tree to replace every single one of those, and only just replace it, not increase by adding extra trees as well. So the summary of this is it costs less to treat these trees over 9 years than it costs to remove and replace them. If these trees are chemically treated, then we also get to preserve this $1,846 benefit that they provide. And then additionally, if we treat them, you avoid the cost of possible property damage and public safety risk if you do nothing, and you avoid the increased cost of removal if you take them down after they're infested, because again, those trees become very brittle, and at that point you do have to hire a contractor to take them down. So in this way, this makes a lot of sense. And we've already started with treating these trees, so. We also identified those 436 required removal trees across the city. These are trees that can't be treated, so we didn't calculate their benefit, simply because they can't be preserved in the urban canopy. But we did want to calculate sort of an estimated budget of what it would cost to take those trees down. And again, since we had that tree by tree data of whether or not something was over an uninsulated top line, or if something was over someone's house, we knew which trees would need to be removed by a contractor and which ones could be removed by Ben's team. So it would be $1,221 per tree to remove the contractor trees, and then $572 to remove them in-house. So the thing that I want to highlight here is, again, removing these trees is an optional And by taking them down now, you would avoid the cost of property damage and public safety if you don't do anything with them. And then you also avoid that increased cost. Additionally, though, it's noticeable that it is half the cost to have all of this done in-house. So that's just something to think about moving forward in terms of investing resources into.
But so that accounts for 250 trees being treated, 436 removed now, but you still got up to that other 1,800.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, so this is the big thing that we would like your guys' input on. We ran the numbers, so the benefits of these trees, which it was, yeah, over 1,000 something. 400, I had that summary thing and I took it out for the other presentation and never put it back in. It's over $7 million across a 10-year period. We used a 10-year period for this one because again, that's that killing front. So we were looking at like what benefits would these provide across that time period that we're going to lose them. So yeah, over $7 million or over $6,000 per tree. The cost of treating them would be $36,000 or $31 per tree across that 10-year period. Again, that could adjust if we want to work them into that 9-year treatment cycle. And then it would be $582,000 or $498 per tree to remove them. And again, this was determined to be based on just removing them in-house. I believe, yes. So that cost would increase if we were needing to hire contractors to do this. And then additionally, replacing them would be $327 per tree. So the summary of that is obviously if you want to preserve this $7 million benefit, you don't want to spend $500,000 taking them down, and it makes a lot more sense to spend $31 per tree to then preserve that $6,000 benefit.
Is that $31 per year?
Per tree, yes, so essentially this was discounted across 10 years, but it was, the original price was calculated across the 10 years, summed and then divided by the number of trees, so it's per trees across a 10-year period.
And that's in-house treatment.
Yes, yeah, with the assumption, again, this number is reduced, so that would probably be even less money. This is 2.5 mils now.
How much time does it take to treat a tree?
One tree, depending on the diameter, would take probably less than 10 minutes.
10 to 20 minutes. I would
How
say.
many trees is this now for the math of the 436 and the 250? This is
1168.
okay. Thank you.
So
Thank you, sorry.
1,200 trees.
That slide didn't make it back into this. I had to shorten it and then lengthen it again.
Well, that certainly seems like a no-brainer, but the question is where the $36,000 is gonna come from, is that the question?
Yeah, that's what we need input on. And we'll go through my final recommendations, which kind of involves that. The other part of this is monitoring. Ben did make some trap trees sort of over near the Herman border. Did you end up taking those down yet? Okay, they're along the Herman border. The idea of this is when you stress out an ash tree, it produces pheromones that attract the adult borers. So if you engineer a stressed tree, they'll fly to the top of it and you give it a year or two, and then you can cut them down and look at the upper canopy and see if the insect has arrived there. And that way you can confirm that they're in the area, and that they are flying in this direction. Additionally, I'm sure you've seen them, the Maine Forest Service has put up purple prism traps, kind of dispersed across the city. Same concept, they have that pheromone chemically engineered and put into these traps, and they're sticky on the outside, so the insects will fly to them, land on them, and then they take those down and periodically do a count to see if they can find any. Additionally, we do have that, private ash tree reporting feature that is live on SeeClickFix. We do intend to add a emerald ash borer sighting feature, but for the time being, we are accepting calls if people are seeing them the same way that you would any other kind of work order situation. And then the other part of this is like continuing to have people out on, you know, a fairly regular basis, looking after the trees that we have treated, because we've invested that money in them and we want to make sure that they're doing well and not getting harmed. I think a big part of this is going to be engaging with the community and trying to promote some stewardship through that. I think the amount of positive feedback we've gotten so far has been really promising. Obviously, there are some people that don't like the positioning of a tree or don't like things in a certain space and don't necessarily know that it's publicly owned. So I think just sort of talking to the public more about why it's important to keep these trees well and healthy and make sure that they're cared for into the future is really important as well.
Remind me, I know we talked about this before, but any biological controls?
Yes, yeah, at this time, I don't believe they're releasing any in urban areas. We have thought about that as an option for the city forest because it meets the acreage criteria for the Maine Forest Service release of a emerald ash borer parasite. I'm forgetting the species. It's a small wasp, and it parasitizes the larvae. We have talked about that, but not necessarily pulled the trigger on it because I do believe you need to have an identification within a certain mileage of the release site. So that may be something to look into in the future. But, and you can't control where those parasites go after you release them, so it's very possible they would then go and help our urban trees as well. So that's something to consider. Public outreach and education, Ben has been really good about staying in touch with the Bangor School Department, specifically the high school, and getting some high school science students involved with this effort, which was great because they go back home and talk to their parents about it and talk to their friends about it and all of this other stuff. And we had a couple of kids really engaged with it, and I think we want to continue that into the future. We've given talks to local organizations. Ben and I presented to the Rotary Club of Bangor to talk about this. We've also had a couple articles in the Bangor Daily News. We've been on News Center, we've been on WABI, we've been on Spectrum. All just kind of beating the drum and letting people know what's going on. Additionally, we've been in touch, not super recently, but I'm hoping for the end of the summer to be back in touch with local Penobscot basket makers. There is potential that they could use some of our green ash wood to make baskets, and we obviously want to give them the right of first refusal to that because of the cultural importance of this. And also their knowledge around forest stewardship is pretty indispensable, so we want to make sure they're very much involved. And through that, we've worked with the Ash Protection Collaboration across Wabanaki out of the University of Maine. And they have been super helpful in a lot of ways. Additional considerations, and this is part of where we want a lot of your input. Wood use and disposal, like I mentioned, wood banks are an option. We just have to make sure we're following those quarantine regulations, which would mean that we're figuring out a way to somehow make sure that people aren't moving that ash wood out of Bangor, or make sure that we're seasoning it for an appropriate amount of time so that by the time it is moved out of Bangor, because inevitably someone will do that accidentally or otherwise, that the borer isn't a threat to the area that it's moved to. We also want to explore what to do about folks' privately owned ash trees that pose a risk to their homes, to other people's homes. I think a lot of that is in that public outreach and education component. I think another part of that is folks kind of talking to their neighbors and figuring out a plan for their neighborhood. And, you know, yeah, just continuing to make this a topic of conversation. Exploring additional partnerships. I know someone at the Maine Forest Service had mentioned talking to Versant about getting some of these trees that are hazardous because they're under the power lines, like just fully removed by them to save us that cost, because that's in their best interest as well. And then additionally, continuing to kind of foster cooperation across all of Bangor's departments. Parks and Rec is obviously going to play a major role in this. The city planner's office, school department, because we have a couple of treatment trees on their school grounds. So just making sure that everyone is talking to each other. So recommendation summary, this is a lot, but I'm gonna run through it. This is also, everything that I've talked about is in this plan. So if you need to refer back to anything at any time, and you want to email me and ask questions, I'm happy to do that as well. So we want to treat those 250 selected treatment trees. And again, I didn't get a chance to revise this, but with 2.5 milliliters per inch diameter of emamectin benzoate starting in the spring of 2025 and continuing for 9 years on that 3-year rotation. We also want to remove those 436 required removal trees in order of the most hazardous to least hazardous across a 4 to 5 year period. There is wiggle room on that, obviously, because it's going to move across the city on a year by year basis. So there is some flexibility there depending on staffing and how quickly they can come down. Continuing to monitor and assess the remaining ash trees. And that should be performed over the next 1 to 2 years to determine when emerald ash borer arrives in Bangor. And also determine if there are any more eligible that could be added to the treatment tree list. Replant lost ash, encourage Bangor citizens to follow state regulated wood quarantines and explore options for ash wood use. And then keep the public well informed regarding emerald ash borer management strategies. Number 3 is where we would really like your input. Financially and from an economic perspective, it makes a lot of sense to treat a lot more trees. That's what other cities have found, and that's my official recommendation within this plan. That being said, determining where those funds come from is going to be a big deal. And I think also making sure that the city council is aware of how important it is to try and protect as many of these trees for as long as possible is a big deal. One of the concepts I often find that people don't necessarily process is that this is not a permanent treatment situation. This is not forever. This is not in perpetuity. The idea is that you're treating them for the period of time that the insect is in the area, weather the storm, allow it to pass over, and then reassess and see where you're at. And I think that's the part that is often lost in translation here. So just something to keep in mind. And then updates as of now, as of June 18th, 85 of those trees have been injected, and these were the total costs of them. Again, these are inflated from what they will probably be next year, because the number of trees will be like 4 less, because I think we're treating 81 next year and 80 the following. And additionally, we did have a contractor helping us, and so he charged his rate on top of the product, whereas with Ben, we were simply just calculating the product cost. So it was $1,886.10 out of the Parks and Recs budget, $808 out of the golf course budget, $338.60 out of the school department budget, and $2,341.50 out of the public works budget, for a total of $5,374.20 this year to treat those trees. And again, that can vary year to year because we are basing this pricing on the size of the tree. So the larger the tree, the more product you have to use, the more expensive it is. These trees have then been monitored in the following weeks for any adverse health effects. We haven't seen any. We've gotten a lot of rain, which means everything has gone swimmingly. And then we're continuing to monitor for EAB in the city and encouraging the public to reach out if they have any reports of potentially infested trees. So tell your friends to look at their ash trees, please. Yeah, so thanks, Ben. Thanks to Aaron. Thanks to everyone who was on my committee, and then the other interns that helped me out last summer, as well as all the folks at the Maine Forest Service and APCA. But yeah, are there any questions? I know you're kind of asking as we went along. It's a lot. It's like drinking out of a fire hose.
Well, not so much questions as the private trees, I think are a really big concern. I also, just your last few comments, I assume there's some data from areas where one locality has treated and the ones around them have not. It's sort of like COVID, you know, what happens in terms of that, the storm passes, but their neighboring towns, presumably the insects have eaten all the food in those towns and then they're gone too, and they just lost all their trees. Is this the typical
That's
scenario?
Theory. I don't know that there has been anything out of the Midwest yet on what kind of the long term, because so this was a complicated situation because we've had one introduction in the Midwest, and that was in 2002. There was a following independent introduction into the Mid-Atlantic region of the East Coast several years later. I believe it was like 2008, 2009. Those two infestations are staggered then. So the Midwest has theoretically had the killing front pass over it, but that hit them so quickly and with no advance notice that they didn't have time to react. By the time they were reacting, their trees were already dying because that's how they knew that it was happening, was the trees were already dead. So there's not a ton of long-term proactive treatment research out of the Midwest. There is in kind of research controlled settings, but not in the scenario that you just laid out, where like it's one town did something and other towns didn't. There is more of that on the East Coast, because there was a little bit of a heads up when the Midwest got it first, and then it spread more slowly, up the eastern seaboard. And we are in a very fortunate position that we are the northernmost state on the East Coast. And so we are the last ones to get it. So a lot of this comes from the experience of those further south from us. And I talked to a lot of folks from New Hampshire, and their equivalent of the Forest Service down there, and the stuff that they did and what worked and what didn't. So what I am trying to get at is that a lot of this has not been done before. Treating proactively has not been done before, to my knowledge. And if it has been, it is not necessarily published in the usual sources. So I can look into that, absolutely, because I'm curious to know as well. But from my research through this whole process, that was not a scenario I necessarily came across. So this is, I don't want to call it a grand experiment, because hopefully it goes really well, and it isn't that experimental, because it's based on a lot of other research that has happened, but it's a big deal in the forestry community if this works.
I have questions on the difference between the 250 that we're definitely treating, which are $108 per tree. And the rest, the 1,100 that are $31, is that just an economy of scale thing?
That, yes, yeah, essentially. And then additionally, that adds an extra year onto it, because we didn't know how they would necessarily be worked into that 9-year treatment cycle. If we wanted to add on a 4th year and make it a what would that be? Like a 10-year treatment cycle or something. So those costs are subject to change as well. And then additionally, sorry, a lot of those trees, this is all dependent on diameter. A lot of those trees, the 250 that we elected to treat are those like big canopy trees that are like, you go to Hayford Park and you see the massive ones there. A lot of these other ones are on the smaller side. So that also changes the cost.
And that would be the table 7 on 49 that has all the rest of the trees. So that's, it looks like it's only like an extra 4,500 the first year to treat those extra 1,100, which seems a little, it seems hard to imagine, just because there's so many trees, they're spread out.
Yeah.
You'd have to go to each of, so is that including costs, I mean, time?
Each one of those estimates in the time that it would take to inject, which I estimated to be 10 to 20 minutes.
Right.
And that is all based on in-house costs, estimated in-house costs, so Ben and hopefully other crew members participating in that. Again, if we had to hire a contractor to meet that volume, that would increase this cost. All of that being said, the proposal is not that we treat all 1,100 of those, because obviously there's gonna be circumstantial situations where some of those, even though they didn't get flagged as hazardous, are still not planted in the right place, but they're really good for them, but like, they're not gonna stay there long-term kind of thing.
Sure.
So that, this would be a process of like going back through the inventory, going back through the inspection process, and identifying just a larger number that could be eligible. And then again, as we move through time, keeping an eye on them, making sure things don't happen to them.
Right.
Yeah.
And like, this number looks great on paper, but I know from experience, there's nobody working at the forestry department.
Yeah,
I mean, there are people working there, but like, you know, in the 90s, we
Yeah.
had like, you know, 20 or 30 people there, and Roland Perry and like a whole forestry crew, and now
Yeah.
it's like. It's really hard to have the staff time to send someone out there to do this.
Yeah.
stuff.
yeah, and that's,
But it looks great on paper.
Yeah,
which-
absolutely.
And is it funded? Sorry.
Currently, out of, the 250 trees will be funded out of Ben's budget. That was already kind of determined, and that was why we wanted to start injecting this year, and why there was not necessarily a rush, because it is a good time to start. But we wanted to set a precedent that this is something that is in this budget, and this is something that will be spent money on year to year. in terms of future funding, obviously. Things are about to tighten up from the Forest Service and from NRCS. And the usual grant funding sources. So that is a situation we need to think about. Which I'm not well versed in how all of that works. So I'll defer to Ben on that one.
I mean, every year we go in front of city council, has city council been notified of anything, or will it be on the next budget?
They are, this presentation in an abbreviated version was given to them at the last infrastructure committee, and I've spoken to them about it before that as well, when this was sort of just an idea and we hadn't gone through the full process yet. They were all they were receptive, I would say.
Yep.
There was one council member who wasn't at the last meeting, so I
Correct.
guess not everyone
Yep.
is super aware, but they all have copies of the plan, and have been asked to review it.
Has the 2026 budget process gone through and ended?
Yes, yep,
So if we were looking at trying to add in the rest of these trees, it would be a 2027 budget.
correct.
And like, I mean, the other scary number on here is what happens when they actually do die, which they will. if we don't treat them.
And that was the other part of this that we couldn't include in this because we don't have that data, because that would require going through and figuring out how to get hospital bills that have redacted HIPAA information, and how to get car insurance claim information, and how to get Versant damages information or power line damages information from other cities to get even a very rough estimate of how much that would cost. But the assumption is that that would be less than whatever this
Yeah,
31 per tree dollar cost is, or whatever this $107 per tree cost is. So, yeah, that would. I don't want to make it sound more stressful than it is, but that would be a very high cost to public health and also public perception.
Yeah.
Um,
And we
suddenly a
also-
bunch of trees are dead,
And
yeah,
we haven't taken, I mean, we're not actively removing or planting as of yet, but
not in this, not for this project, obviously there's regular,
when.
maintenance stuff.
so I would assume that we all wanna save as many of the ash trees, because like, it just, from facts, it makes sense.
Right.
So the real question is like, how do we do that? Because we've been pushing for forestry to have more staff forever.
Yeah.
And we get a few more people and then they drop off, like it's an ongoing battle. But this is like a clear thing that if we were to somehow fix that problem, get somebody full-time who's master herbicide, pesticide certified, that can be their job, like treating these and dealing with the other invasives that we'll be dealing with. Because that should also probably be part of the forestry service, is dealing with invasives.
Yeah.
And getting that into the 2026-2027 budget as like a staff person
Yeah.
hired to do that.
I think that would be wise and or investing in the already existing arborist positions so that those people want to stay.
Yes.
And who's in charge of making that budget? Is that Ruben or who does?
It's a combined effort. We sit down, every division sits down with the director and usually winter time and goes over wants, needs, desires for next fiscal year to bring forward for finance committee. And then those items are brought forward. 2026, we did not have final numbers for treatment, removal, et cetera, prior to that meeting, so I don't have anything earmarked for that, but.
So I guess, I don't know who would answer this question. If this, I mean, we give the thumbs up to this and it goes to city council and they give the thumbs up to this, the recommendation is to treat the 1,100 extra trees.
And that is in here somewhere, in this
Okay.
massive document.
So, hopefully, once, because we're very low on the totem pole, we don't actually have any decision power. We just give recommendations. Once it gets up to the city council level and, city manager's been here for more than a couple months and we got a new public works director, like.
Mhm.
Hopefully they will take this thing that they have voted to do and make it happen somehow.
Yeah, I think the thing that is absent from this, and it was mainly because I didn't necessarily want to overstep, because I don't necessarily know how this system works, is the suggestion that staffing be increased. I think right now it is at like a 2 sentence situation of you should increase staff. The logistics of how that happens could be added into this. Time infrastructure.
It could be an urban forestry management plan thing.
Yes.
Yes.
Because
that's the thing.
that was what I was hoping to get out of that plan, is like,
Yes,
here's how many people we should have, like, we
Mhm.
should have
and
a half dozen arborists on
Yep.
staff as opposed to
yes.
one arborist on staff.
Yeah. And that was the other fruitful thing that came out with speaking with EOC about their plan. They will have the ability to look at. City of Bangor, our number of assets or number of trees, square mileage, and then say, hey. So-and-so city in the Midwest who has the same number of city streets, city trees, has this many forestry division. Employees,
Right.
and then
And
they
then
get
you-
this much.
Yeah,
So,
Yeah.
they'll be able to provide some insight as to correct suggested staffing.
That would be nice, because I know other departments in the city, like, they're always like, we're understaffing is like a
Oh, yeah.
common problem.
yeah,
But there are departments that have gotten to full staffing, so it's,
Yep.
I think we could do that.
Oh, yeah, yep, and Public Works is no different, we get full, we lose a few, we get full, we lose a few, we have. 5 interviews next week, 4 interviews for general heavy equipment operators, so. Certainly possible.
I think that answers all my questions. We're also, we're gonna be way over time. We already are.
sorry.
As long as people know and they're fine with it, you can leave whatever you want. We're not. Handing you to the table.
Yeah, well, there's so many
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah.
Just very quickly, in terms of that, the C-Click fix, the, privately owned ash tree inventory, are you getting any response? I mean, I went already and did mine, but
I
are you getting
will-
any response to that?
I'll be pretty blunt, no.
No,
We've
yeah,
got, I
so,
think, 2 in probably a year that it has been.
Yeah.
Um,
so there, people obviously are not getting the word on that.
Yeah. And I think there is definitely opportunity to do more like face-to-face conversation as opposed to trying to disseminate that information through various online sources or media sources.
Yep.
Yeah,
But that seems like a project students, maybe high school students or college
Mhm.
students, a door to door, or, a door hanger thing, or some way that the word could get out.
yeah,
In neighborhoods, even if those teams could identify ash trees and say, you have an ash tree, because a lot of people probably don't even know. You have an ash tree in your yard and here's what's coming.
Yeah.
But I think I'm very concerned about that because threats to public safety are just as big from a
Yeah.
privately owned tree as from a publicly owned
yeah,
tree.
absolutely. And additionally, the benefits that those trees provide are
Yeah,
equally as important as the ones that are publicly owned. So the other thing to explore further in the future, because we've got the nursery kind of getting off the ground right now, so that's gonna help a lot with increasing the volume of trees planted every year. For publicly owned areas is Lewiston, and I encourage you, it's in the plan, but I encourage you all to read up on it too. They have this program called a tree bait. So it's the idea that like, if you buy your own tree, you can submit to the city that you have purchased this tree and they have a certain amount of money available to like give you back X amount for the purchase of that tree.
Mhm.
And it just encourages people to kind of add to their own little private property canopy. And there's lots of other programs across the United States that do similar things. But again, I think that's more of like a 2 to 3 year out concept around, and or could be included in the urban forest management plan.
Certainly seems like educational information that we could get out.
Oh, totally.
Like, if someone has an ash tree. They should know that there's a state list where they could like just.
Yeah.
Or even if we just listed the people in the county on the city website so that those people got.
Yeah.
Were directed. who to
Yeah.
call.
You're talking about contractors?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I agree with that as well.
Cause when we were heavy in Browntail, I prepared a list and I got phone calls all the time.
Exactly.
And that list was sent, you make your decision, these are the people that have said, yes, I'll treat for Browntail or for Browntail,
Yeah.
et cetera.
So that's also something else I could work on to try and get that into this before.
Yep.
Kind of final.
If I know, I believe in the past you have done social media. But if you have one, something that's shareable that actually has a link or phone numbers, I mean, a lot of, there are different names like Facebook pages that.
Oh, yeah.
We could
Yep.
share them to, and if people have questions, just to
Mhm.
contact you or whomever else.
Yeah, yeah,
But
Dave,
if you could do a really good posting that's easy to share, then.
Yeah.
I know in our neighborhood, I could put it on our Facebook page.
Like a yard sign next to some of the, in parks, next to some of the ash trees.
Yeah, so we did, when we treated, a lot of the, like, very publicly viewable, specifically Hayford Park, we did put out a sign basically saying we're treating this ash tree for animal ash borer. We hope that you will participate in the stewardship of this tree by preventing food damage or like letting us know if something happens. Here's our number. And then here's the Maine Forest website for more information on animal ash borer. So we did do that. People like to take down those pretty quickly. So that, yeah, I think after like 5 days.
Are the ash trees or the blue dots, the ones that are trees?
yes.
Yeah,
Blue or orange.
I
if you
ran
out of blue.
sorry.
Thank you, kiddos.
All right, we are over. and
Yes,
There was one
sorry.
other thing that I wanted to, which Annette has already seen,
I know.
issue with the Bangor Beautiful Committee. I wanted to present the idea for the fall tree planting, which I've come up with a plan, sent it to them. And just gave it out to the tree committee. Sorry, that's a.
No, you're still fine.
Thank you, so.
Yes, and we already had the Vincent Nursery project update, we had the Brown Hill, we didn't do the Brown Town Hall update, we will skip that.
Yep.
today.
That is fine.
And we don't have any resident removals.
No.
So. Bangor Beautiful's been doing about 12 to 20 trees per season, and we wanna do 15, which I didn't correct on here, but I corrected in pen, around the Broadway, York Street, section of Broadway. And I was proposing 15. A bunch squeezed into the median in the center. We'll need to do dig safe there, and I don't know, some of these will probably not fit, just because I know they just did the whole intersection, traffic lighting stuff, so there's
Mhm.
probably underground utilities, so some of these may not fit. And then I was also talking with Anya, the city planner, about doing black gum instead of the red maples, because they are more salt tolerant and they are a more diverse species. We've already planted a bunch of red maples.
Mhm. For black gum,
I'm trying to remember.
that was one of the ones that survived the worst after planting. I don't know an official percentage that survived, but not too many of them did too good.
Oh,
So we're concerned about drought tolerance
okay.
into the future.
And I'd have to look at the data to see whether they were planted in the spring or the fall.
And I will say red maples have been found to have, they like occupy every niche.
Right.
So they're very drought tolerant and they're very flood tolerant and they're a very safe bet.
Okay.
Can we, I mean, if and when you plant a tree in my yard, I will water it. Like, can we engage the local people to take
Yeah,
care of
that's another-
Well,
it?
these would have tree diapers,
Okay,
which we haven't lost a tree to dehydration yet.
Nope.
Okay.
Except maybe down along the railroad, but that was. So, I don't know, I'm fine with either, but, black gum seemed like
Hmm?
something to be a little more diverse. These, they would be up in the area that's the very wide section of the Esplanade. So they're not in an area that has, it's got more permeable space.
Okay.
And there would be 3, so.
Yeah.
Could give it a try.
Yes.
Mhm.
And I also, for those 5 and the service berries, I was gonna get from Maine, Audubon, so they will be the smaller
Yep.
trees.
Shrub form,
The service berries would be shrub because
Yep.
they're gonna be in a, like a 2-foot
Yes.
section.
yep, by the
Um,
church parking.
And the others would be, they're probably 4 or 5 feet, but they're not gonna be like the size you get.
Oh, yeah.
for-
No. That's fine.
And it'll make it easier for us planting.
Mhm.
And then hackberry, which I realized is not native to Maine, but is can be climate
Yes.
adaptive and,
Yeah.
might be something to start bringing in.
Mhm. Yep, and that's, hackberry is on my recommended
Yeah, I
list.
pulled from your list for the most
Yep, it's just tough to get,
part. Okay,
pretty tough to get.
I was gonna say, 'cause it's
Um,
not through Maine Audubon,
Yep.
I wanted, if we say we wanna do this, I wanna make sure I confirm with the nurseries before we go to city council, so that I know we can get these species.
Yep. The only place I know of regionally that has it is generally Plants Unlimited, not Plants, Pearson in Biddeford.
All right, would there be a better alternative if I couldn't get hackberry?
Um.
It's in an area where there's already 2, I'm pretty sure they're Norway maples,
Yes,
it's.
Yeah.
There is Esplanade there, there's plenty of overhead room, but it seems like they're struggling probably from drought.
narrow, yeah. There's also a lot of soil compaction.
Yes.
That goes on
Yeah,
there,
is
so.
around that intersection, yeah.
Yep.
The,
I would have to think on that one.
Okay,
Being tolerant.
shade intolerant,
Yeah, just
Yeah.
something that likes full sun.
yes, and drought tolerant.
Yeah.
And salt tolerant, because it's gonna have both sides of the road. I don't know, if you wanna think about
Yeah.
it, get back to me, and assuming that we're good with this plan, then I could make changes and get you final, so that we have final numbers and final
Yes.
confirmed species before they go to infrastructure.
Okay.
We take it in September, do planting in October?
Yeah,
Give us
I
time.
think that'll work.
Thumbs up?
Yeah,
Okay.
sounds great to me. I've been picking and eating service berries for the last week and made a cobbler last night. They're
That's
great.
awesome.
Yeah.
That's all I got.
May I just?
Yes.
One thing, and I bring it up, I think, almost at every meeting, they're doing some paving work and sidewalk work in my neighborhood on
Yes.
Norfolk Street.
Yep.
And I still notice that tree bases are banged.
Oh, yeah.
On Norfolk between Poplar and Linden, there are 2 trees, and I saw when the sidewalks, I happened to be biking by. When they just went down with the paving, they were still working their way down, and this tree had fresh
Mhm.
slashes in it. You know, we talk about these trees dying and other trees dying, and I don't know what these trees are. They could be ones that are gonna be on the list that need to go anyway.
Yep.
But it's just, I mean, I have pictures of, and it's just, and just the sidewalk being enlarged, and I know we were supposed to, but like, if you didn't have a sidewalk that could accommodate 5 feet, it would be less.
Mhm.
So why in the world, I mean, and I could show you later on, you know, are we eating into our esplanades? And against trees and even carving a tree where a root or something came up. Or not, whatever this,
Ooh, ouch.
Oh, geez.
I mean, I understand we want sidewalks, we like sidewalks and paved roads, but. You know, I don't think it's helping the health of a tree.
Oh, yeah,
By
no,
doing that, and plus the other 2 are, you know, slashed at the bottom that are further up the street, and that's just my neighborhood example.
yeah,
So, and you know, I understand people working hard and trying to get things done, but I just want to bring that up and
Mhm.
something that maybe we could maybe look into
Oh, yeah.
education,
That's a conversation we have. Forest management plan. too.
Yes, yeah,
Is not just replanting, but like preservation
Hmm.
of what.
Well, on the weed whacking, I've talked about that at the Downey School, the weed whacking, all the trees there are damaged around the base from the weed whacking, which is just unnecessary,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's definitely a training issue with like, cause there's the highway, like. Foreman people out there doing the groundwork, and then there's the tree people like they. There needs to be a little better training on how to take care of the trees by the people that are out there on the ground.
Yep.
And it's been an issue the whole time we've been on the tree board.
yeah, yeah. And some of the things, it would add more work, we could look into doing is when we used to do. New home construction, we would wrap the trees with boards and then keep them together with like lashing. So that if you do bang them with an excavator or a skid steer, you bang the boards instead of, so.
but a cost of that, with a budget that is,
Mhm.
if you watch city council budget.
Oh, yeah,
I mean, they did not want anything really, new programs, new nothing. You were talking earlier about funding more people. Obviously push the financial benefit of
Mhm.
having these people because of what we were just and what you mentioned to them in the past, but you need to really push that. Forget about the whole presentation, just saying, how would you like to save this amount of money? And we just need to do that and keep it clear and simple and not a big, beautiful,
Oh,
which I
thank you.
appreciate. It's a wonderful
Sorry.
presentation.
It went way longer.
No, I'm fine with it, but I'm just saying, maybe they have so many things on their
Yeah.
mind that it's not as important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe not, yeah, so.
Yeah, they have seen all of these numbers already, so I think the next round is like, here's this, you've had it for a couple weeks, hopefully you read it. Here's the big take home message of what we've discussed at the tree board.
I think you just need to have the numbers on the screen.
Yep.
And that's it, just, this is what we will save,
Yeah,
this is what, and injuries and all that. That's, I think, if they read that, I'd be very surprised, to be honest.
yeah. Okay,
They have so much
Yeah.
going on and so
Yeah.
many things that they need to.
absolutely.
So anyway.
Yeah, good recommendation.
Did we ever give a thumbs up on the Camel Dashboard plan? Do a
Officially.
official thumbs up.
Go for it, go for it,
That's a
yes,
four of
excellent,
our four.
excellent
you.
work.
And I,
excellent work.
took mental note of things that you guys said and have a couple of ideas that I might fiddle with before the infrastructure committee presentation. Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Good meeting.
All right, I think we're done.
Yes.
Again, I apologize for
No,
taking
it's
up so
okay.
much of your
This
guys'
is
time.
more than.
Well, you get me going and I
Yeah.
can't
Well,
stop.
I think
And
it's
it's only an hour
fascinating.
meeting, it really needs way more or something.
Yeah, and if you guys do, again, if you do review this and it's pretty dense, so if you don't get through the whole thing, that is understandable.